Forward. The top secret truth about Captain Underpants.
Hello? Before you read this book, there's some things you should know. So, Harold and I have created this informative pamphlet to fill you in on the details.
Please don't let this comic fall into the wrong hands. Once upon a time, there were two cool kids named George and Harold.
You're cool!
Me too! They made their own comics about a superhero named Captain Underpants.
Tra-la-la!
Everybody thought their comics were funny. Except for their mean old principal, Mr. Crub.
Blah 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 blah.
One time, Mr. Crub was being mean to George and Harold.
Blah blah blah.
So they bought the 3D Hypno Ring. They hypnotized Mr. Crub.
I will obey.
Then they turned him into Captain Underpants. But Mr. Crub thought he really was Captain Underpants. He jumped out the window to fight crime.
Uh-oh. Tra-la-la.
George and Harold tried to stop him, but they had to save the world first. When they got back to school, George poured water on Captain Underpants' head. He turned back into Mr. Crub. But something was wrong.
Blah blah blah.
Because now, for some strange reason, every time Mr. Crub hears somebody snap their fingers, he turns back into Captain Underpants.
Tra-la-la. So whatever you do, please don't snap your fingers around Mr. Crop.
Please, please, please don't snap those fingers! This has been a public service announcement for George and Harold, who still deny everything. The end. Treehouse Comics Inc. Chapter 1. George and Harold. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold's the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now? Remember that now? Depending on who you ask, you probably hear a lot of things about George and Harold. Their teacher, Miss Ribble, might say that George and Harold were destructive and behaviorally challenged. Their gym teacher, Mr. Meaner, might add that they're in serious need of a major attitude adjustment. Their principal, Mr. Crab, will probably add a few more choice words to include, like
sneaky
and
criminally mischievous
and
I'll get those boys if it's the last thing I—
Well, you get the idea. But if you ask their parents, they'll probably tell you that George and Harold were smart and sweet and very good-hearted, even if they're a bit silly at times. I had to agree on their parents. But even so, their silliness did get them into a lot of trouble. Sometimes, in fact, it got them into so much trouble they accidentally destroyed the whole planet with an army of evil, vicious, talking toilets. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 2. This story. One fine morning at Jerome Howard's elementary school, George and Harold just gotten out their 4th grade and were at remedial gym class when they saw a big sign in the hallway. It was an announcement for the 2nd annual Invention Convention. George and Harold had fond memories of last year's Invention Convention, but this year's convention was a bit different. The first prize winner got to be principal for the day.
Wow!
Said George.
Whoever gets to be principal gets to make up all the rules for the whole day, and everybody in school has to follow those rules!
We gotta win first prize this year! Exclaimed Harold. Just then, George and Harold's principal, Mr. Krupp, showed up.
Aha!
He shouted.
I bet you two are up to no good! Not really,
said George.
We were just reading about this year's contest.
Yeah, said Harold. We're gonna win first prize in the contest and be principals for the day. Laughed Mr. Krupp.
Do you honestly think I let you two enter this year's contest of that stunt you pulled at last year's Invention Convention?
George and Harold smiled and thought back to the first annual Invention Convention. Chapter 3. The Flashback. It was about 1 year earlier and all the faculty and students of Jerome Howard Elementary School gathered around the gymnasium for what would later be known as the sticky chair incident. George and Harold stepped up to the microphone.
Ladies and gentlemen,
said George.
you and I are sometimes guaranteed to keep you all glued to your seats.
Yes, said Harold. Because glue. Mr. Crab became very angry.
You two did not invent glue!
He shouted. He stood up to take the microphone away from Harold, and his chair stood up with him. Everyone in the gymnasium laughed. The school secretary, Miss Anthrode, stood up to help remove Mr. Krup's chair from his pants. Her chair stood up with her too. Her Everyone in the gymnasium laughed harder. The other teachers stood up then. You guessed it, they all stuck to their chairs as well. Everyone in the audience howled with laughter. One kid stood up to go to the bathroom, and his chair came up with him also. The audience stopped laughing so hard. They quickly checked their chairs, and suddenly, the laughter stopped completely. Everyone in the whole school was glued to their seats. You see, while it was true that George and Harold had not invented glue, they had invented a new kind of glue. By simply mixing rubber cement with concentrated orange juice mix, they had created a quick-drying, body heat-activated glue. Then applied this special glue to every seat in the gymnasium, except theirs, early in that morning. Everyone in the gymnasium was glaring at George and Harold and seething with anger.
I got a good idea.
Said George. What? Asked Harold.
Run!
Cried George. George and Harold were grinning from ear to ear, remembering their silly invention and the chaos that followed. That was hilarious, laughed Harold.
Yeah.
Chuckled George.
It'd be hard on top that this year.
Well, you won't get a chance this year,
said Mr. Crump. He took out a magnifying glass and held it out to the fine print on the sign.
This contest is open to all students in the 3rd and 4th grades except George Beard and Harold Hutchins.
You mean we can't enter the contest? Asked Harold.
It's worse than that.
Laughed Mr. Crump.
You boys can't even attend this year's convention. I'm putting you two in study hall that whole day.
Mr. Crump turned and walked away, laughing victoriously. Rats, said Harold. What are we gonna do now?
Well,
said George.
you know the old saying, if you can't join them, beat them.
Chapter 4. The Invention. Early that evening, George and Hal sneaked back to school with their supplies. They crept into the gymnasium and peeked around. I think someone's still in there, whispered Harold.
Oh, it's just Melvin Scenery,
said George. Melvin was the school brainiac. He was busy putting some last-minute touches on his new invention for the contest. We should wait here until he leaves, whispered Harold.
No way,
said George.
He could be here all night. Let's just go over and talk to him.
When Melvin saw George and Harold approaching, he was not happy.
Oh, no!
He said.
I bet you guys are here to mess up everybody's inventions.
Nice guess,
said George.
Listen, you promise not to mess with your invention if you promise not to tell anybody you saw us here tonight.
Melvin looked lovingly at his invention and reluctantly agreed.
I promise,
he said.
Great,
said George.
Say, what is that invention of yours anyway? It just looks like a photocopy machine.
well, it used to be a photocopy machine,
said Melvin.
but I made some major adjustments to it. Now it is an invention that will realize the world. I call it the Patsy 2000.
It'll revolutionize the world? And you name it Patsy? Asked Harold.
Yes.
Said Melvin.
Patsy is an algorithm for photo-automatic transolution.
I'm sorry I've asked, said Harold.
Allow me to demonstrate.
Said Melvin.
The Patsy 2000 can take any one-dimensional image and create a living, breathing, three-dimensional copy of that image. For example, take this ordinary photograph of a mouse.
Melvin placed a photo of the mouse onto the class screen of the Patsy 2000 and pressed start. The lights in the gymnasium dimmed as all the power in the entire school seemed to get sucked into the Patsy 2000. Soon, the machine began to vibrate and hum loudly, and tiny bolts of static electricity snapped out from underneath. I hope that thing doesn't explode, said Harold.
Oh, this is nothing.
Said Melvin.
You should have seen how the Patsy 2000 reacted when I copied the poodle.
Finally, after a series of flashes and loud zaps, everything stopped. A small ding was heard. Then a tiny mouse crawled down the side door of the Patsy 2000 and onto the floor.
Isn't it wonderful?
Exclaimed Melvin. George inspected the mouse carefully.
That's a great trick.
George laughed.
You really had me going for a while.
It's not a trick.
Cried Melvin.
The Patsy 2000 really does bring photos to life. I've even created living creatures from paintings and drawings.
Yeah, right, laughed Harold. And I thought we were con artists. George and Harold walked away, chuckling. It was time to move on to bigger and better things. Chapter 5. Bigger and Better Things. George and Harold went to the other end of the gymnasium, opened their backpacks, and began to work. George busied himself by turning on the spray nozzles on the automatic dog washer around, while Harold was filling up the soap tank with India ink. Then they moved on to the volcano detector. Will you please pass me the big bag of butterscotch pudding and the Phillips head screwdriver? Asked Harold.
Sure.
Said George as he carefully inserted eggs into the electric ping pong ball server. Chapter 6. The Invention Convention. The following day started out sunny and cheerful. The students and faculty filed into the gymnasium and checked their seats very carefully before sitting down.
Greetings!
Said Mr. Go, who was standing at the microphone.
You don't need to worry about sitting seats today.
He said.
I've taken measures to ensure that this convention won't be a disaster like last year's.
Everyone settled in as Madison Mancini, a third grader, stepped on stage to demonstrate her automatic dog washer.
First,
Said Madison.
you put the dog in the tub, then you press this button.
Madison pressed the start button. At first, nothing happened, and suddenly, a squirt of inky black water sprayed up and out over the crowd. Everyone, except the dog, got soaked as Madison tried desperately to turn off the sprayers.
I can't stop it!
She cried.
Now, who could have done that?
Asked Mr. Krupp. Next up was Donnie Schumacher with his electric ping pong ball server. He turned on the machine and immediately began hurling extra large, grade A eggs into the crowd. Foop, 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 went the machine. Splat, 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 went the eggs.
I can't turn the machine off.
Cried Donnie.
Somebody jammed the big equipment to the controller.
Now who could have done that?
Asked Miss Ribble. Freddie Moore's volcano detector was also a big flop. When Freddie connected the circuits on the 9-volt battery, a large spring, which had been crammed into the center of the miniature volcano, launched a giant plastic bag of butterscotch pudding high into the crowd. It landed somewhere between the third and fourth rows. Splat!
Hey!
Why, Freddie?
Somebody put pudding in my volcano!
Now, who could have done that?
Asked Mr. Meaner. The rest of the day went on much the same way, with people shouting everything from, "Hey, who put on me my solar powered leaf blower?" to,
Hey, who went on my side of my treadmill dune buggy?
it wasn't long before everyone fled the gymnasium and the second annual invention convention had to be called off.
How could this have happened?
Cried Mr. Krabs as he wiped chocolate syrup, pencil shavings, and cream of mushroom soup off his face and shirt.
George and Harold have been in study hall all day long. I put them there myself.
Excuse me, Mr. Crump.
Said Melvin sneevely.
I think I have an answer to your question.
Chapter 7. Busted. Crash went the door in the study hall room. Mr. Krabs stopped like a crazy person. George and Harold had never seen him this upset before.
You boys are in so much trouble!
Mr. Krabs shouted.
I'm putting you two on permanent detention for the rest of the school year!
Wait a second.
Cried George.
You can't prove anything.
Yeah, said Harold. We've been here all day. Mr. Krabs smiled devilishly and looked towards the door.
Oh, Melvin!
He called. Melvin sneevily stepped into the room, covered in mustard, eggshell, and shredded coconut.
They did it.
Melvin said, pointing at George and Harold.
I saw him last night in the gym.
Melvin,
Cried George, horrified.
you promised.
I changed my mind.
Melvin said, grimly, smugly.
Have fun in detention.
Chapter 8. The Invention Convention Detention. After school, Mr. Crow ushered George and Harold into the detention room and drew a long sentence on the chalkboard.
From now on,
Growled Mr. Krupp.
you boys will spend 2 hours a day after school copying the sentence over and over. I want every chalkboard in this room filled completely.
On his way out the door, Mr. Krupp turned and said with an evil grin,
And if either of you leaves this room for any reason, I'm going to suspend you both!
Now, as you might have guessed, writing sentences was nothing new to George and Harold. The two boys waited until Mr. Krupp left the room. Then they each took 4 homemade wood rods out of their backpacks. The rods had holes in them that George and Harold had drilled in George's dad's workshop. George screwed the rods together, while Harold inserted a piece of chalk onto each hole. Then they each took a pole and began copying Mr. Krupp's sentence. Every time they wrote one sentence, the wooden poles made 12. After about 3.5 minutes, every chalkboard in the room was completely completely filled. George and Hal sat down to admire their work.
We got a lot of time on our hands now.
Said George.
Got any ideas?
Let's make a new comic book, said Harold. So the two boys took out some paper and pens and created an all-new adventure about their favorite superhero. It was called Captain Underpants and the Attack of the Talking Toilets. Chapter 9! Captain Underpants and the Attack of the Talking Toilets! One day at school, everything was pretty normal. The lunch ladies were serving toasted rat sandwiches. The principal was yelling.
Blah 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 blah.
And the gym teacher was being mean to everybody.
My grandma can run faster than you guys.
Then a UFO appeared. It zapped the school with an evil ray. The ray made all the toys come to life. It made them evil too. The toys were hungry.
Yum yum, eat 'em up. Yum yum, eat 'em up.
So they ate the gym teacher.
Help! The toy just scratched somebody's car and ate up the gym teacher. Lord have mercy. Was it my car? This looks like a jump board.
Captain Underpants!
Captain Underpants ran to the storage room.
Yum yum, eat 'em up.
He found a bunch of plungers. He puts them in the toilet. Their mouths got stuck.
Tra-la-la! Hooray for Captain Underpants! Gotta stop that evil UFO.
Captain Underpants went outside and saw the UFO. It opened up. It outjumped the terrible Turbo Toy 2000.
I'll flush you!
They had a big fight. Captain Underpants was faster than a speeding waistband, more powerful than boxer shorts,
Tra-la-la!
and able to lead tall bills without getting a wedgie. Captain Underpants knocked out behind the Turbo Toy 2000 and gave them a wedgie.
Wedgie power!
Ouchie!
Then he hung the TT2000 on a stop sign and pulled back hard. Then he let go. The spaceship blew up and all the toys returned to normal.
Hooray!
Even the gym teacher escaped.
Oh man!
The end. Treehouse Comics Inc. Chapter 10. A Big Mistake. George and Hal sat together in the detention room, reading through their newest comic book and breathing proudly.
We gotta go to the office to make copies of this,
Said George.
so we can sell them on the playground tomorrow.
We can, said Harold. Don't you remember? Mr. Krabs said he'll his expenses if he caught us leaving this room,
Then we won't let them catch us.
said George. George and Hal sneaked out on the room quietly and crawled down the hall of the office. Uh-oh, said George. There's a bunch of teachers in there. We'll never get to use the copy machine, said George.
Are there any other copy machines in the school?
How about the one that Melvin had in the gym? Asked Harold,
Oh yeah.
said George. George and Hal crept over the gym and found the Patsy 2000. I wonder if this machine still makes copies, said Harold. Melvin did say that he made some adjustments to it,
Oh, he probably just crammed a mouse in there to fool us.
said George.
It's the oldest trick in the book. I'm sure the machine still makes regular copies.
George placed the cover of their new comic book face down on the glass screen and pressed start. All at once, the lights in the whole school dimmed as the Patsy 2000 began to shake and color around wildly. Giant volts of electricity zapped out the bottom of the machine as a great whirlwind rose at the top. Loose papers and other small objects in the room were sucked into the wind, and they spun around above the machine like ragging cyclone.
I don't think it's supposed to do this!
Shouted George over the horrible noise. Finally, after a series of flashes and loud zaps, the noise, wind, and sparks stopped altogether. The only sound that could be heard was something groaning and crawling about inside the bloated, battery frame of the Patsy 2000. It sounds like something's alive inside there, said Harold. George snapped the comic book from the top of the machine.
Let's get out of here!
He cried. Just then a small ding was heard. A full-size, shiny white toilet emerged from the side of the Patsy 2000. Its teeth were sharp and jagged, and its angry eyeballs glowed with red, shining veins.
Yum, yum, eat 'em up.
cried the evil toilet. Almost immediately, another talking toilet emerged, followed by another, and another, and another.
Yum, yum, eat 'em up.
They cried. Oh no! Mother was right! The full atomic just for the ballistic, yet defend politic just for the business of surprise or whatever. Really, just create living, breathing, three-dimensional copies of one-dimensional images! Harold cried convulsively.
I got an idea.
Said George. What? Asked Harold.
Run!
Cried George. Chapter 11. The Invention Convention Detention Suspension. George and Harold screamed and ran out of the gym door, closing it tightly behind them.
Ha-ha!
He yelled to Mr. Crow, who was just coming down the hall.
You boys left the detention room. You know what that means, don't you?
It wasn't our fault! Cried Harold.
Too bad.
Mr. Crow shouted with delight.
You boys are delightfully suspended!
Wait,
Cried George.
you got to listen. I'm the store's enormous, evil, vicious.
I don't have to listen to you boys ever again!
Laughed Mr. Crow.
Now get your stuff and get out of school!
But... Harold stammered. You don't understand!
Get out!
Mr. Crow screamed. George and Harold groaned and walked away with their lockers and collected their stuff. Gosh, said Harold. In one day we got a detention, a suspension, and we created an army of evil talking toys who want to take over the world!
That's a pretty bad day, even for our standards.
Said George. Oh well, said Harold. I just hope things don't get any worse. Chapter 12. Things get worse. Word quickly spread throughout the office that George and Harold had been suspended. The teachers rushed out and cheered and laughed at the two boys. You're in big trouble now, chuckled Miss Anthro. I can't wait to call your parents and tell them the news. Let's take their desks outside and chop them off, cried Miss Ribble.
Let's throw a party in the gym!
Shouted Mr. Meaner.
No!
Cried George.
Whatever you do, don't open the door to the gym!
We can do whatever we like!
Snarled Mr. Meaner as he dashed over the gymnasium door.
Look, I'm opening the door!
He quickly opened the gym door.
Now I'm closing the door!
He said.
Now I'm opening the door again! And I'm...
An evil toilet has stuck its mouth through the door, snapped Mr. Meaner up, and swallowed him whole. Flush. The talking toys then pushed their way through the open gymnasium doors and spit out in the hallway.
Yum, yum, eat 'em up!
Toads bellowed.
Yum, yum, eat 'em up!
The teachers couldn't believe their eyes. They screamed and ran for their lives. Only Mr. Krupp, Miss Ribble, and George and Harold remained, frozen in fear. They watched, paralyzed, as the talking toys come nearer and nearer. Finally, Miss Ribble pointed at the toilets and snapped her fingers. Go away! She cried. Go away this minute! But the toys didn't listen. They moved closer and closer. Finally, Miss Ribble turned and ran. Mr. Crow, however, just stood there in a daze. George and Harold looked up at him. Uh-oh, said Harold. Did she just snap her fingers?
Yep,
Said George.
now we're really in trouble.
And George was right. For that moment, Mr. Crow had begun to change. A silly, heroic smile came over his face as he stood defiantly before his foes.
I'll post up to you, vile villains!
He said furiously.
But first, I need the supplies!
Mr. Crab turned and dashed to his office. George and Harold ran after him. Why did Miss Ribble have to snap her fingers? Cried Harold. Why?
Never mind that.
Cried George.
Mr. Krupp's turning to Captain Underpants. We gotta pour water all over his head before it's too late.
Chapter 13. It's too late. When George and Harold reached Mr. Krab's office, they only found his clothes, shoes, and toupee on the floor. Look, said Harold, the window is open, and one of the red curtains is missing.
What do we do now?
Asked Harold.
Do we save Captain Underpants, or we do stay here and get eaten by a bunch of toilets?
Let me think about that one, said Harold as he climbed out the window. George quickly collected Mr. Krab's things and shoved them into his backpack. Then he jumped out the window after Harold. The two boys slid down the flagpole like it's a Mario game again and ran out after Captain Underpants.
Where do you think he's going?
Asked George. I have no idea, said Harold. But we better run fast because I think we're being followed. Captain Underpants dashed through the backyards of some nearby houses and collected pairs of underwear from the clotheslines.
Mommy,
Said a little boy looking out his window.
a man in the red...
Hey! Keep it down out there!
A man in a red cape just stole our underwear. And now 2 boys are being chased by a ferocious looking toy with sharp pointy teeth screaming, "Yum yum, eat 'em up!"
Yeah, right! Love his mother. Just how gullible you think I am? Chapter 14. The Talking Toilet Takeover. When Captain Underpants was finished commander in the underwear of the local citizens, he dashed back to Jerome Horace Elementary to save the day. The school was now overrun with chaos. Miss Riddle came tearing down the door, followed by several evil toilets. "Help me!" she cried. "They swallowed everything in the whole building!" "Except me."
Don't worry, ma'am. I won't let them eat you up.
Captain Underpants said as a toilet ate her up.
Oops.
Said Captain Underpants. Now only George, Harold, and Captain Underpants were left. They stood on the front yard of the school, completely surrounded by hungry, drooling toilets.
Yum, yum, eat 'em up.
The talking toilets chanted.
Yum, yum, eat 'em up. Yum, yum, eat 'em up. Yum, yum, eat 'em up.
"We're doomed!" cried Harold.
Never underestimate the power of underwear.
Cried Captain Underpants as he stretched and shot underwear into the waiting mouths of the talking toilets. Unfortunately, the toilets just swallowed the underwear whole. It only seems to make them hungrier and hungrier,
If only we could think of something that would make them really sick.
said George. "Yeah," Harold continued. "Something so vile and disgusting it will make them blow their cookies and wail in agony." Suddenly, George and Harold's faces lit up.
Cafeteria food!
They shouted. And faster than a speeding waistband, our 3 heroes dashing to the school. Chapter 15. Green Shift Beef to the rescue. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants got inside the school safely and closed the front door behind them,
I think the toilets are outside.
said George. "But not for long," said Harold. Quickly, they ran to the school's kitchen and discovered a cart holding a large vat of something green and sludgy,
Yeah!
said George, holding his nose.
What is this stuff?
"I think it's tomorrow's lunch," said Harold,
Perfect.
said George.
I never thought I'd be glad to see cream chipped beef.
Together, they wheeled the top of stinky green goo down the hallway and out the side door of the school. Captain Underpants set down the cart and stretched a pair of underwear over his head like a slingshot. George stood over him, scooped some cafeteria food into the underwear, and stretched it back. Harold wheeled the car towards the talking toilets.
Tra-la-la!
Shouted Captain Underpants loudly. The talking toilets turned and saw our 3 heroes. All at once, they shouted, "Yum, yum, eat 'em up!" And the chase was on. Harold pulled the cart across the playground as the toilets zipped after them.
Fire 1!
Cried Captain Underpants. George shot a glob of green shift beef into the first toilet's mouth. The toilet swallowed it whole. Harold kept on pulling as George scooped another serving into the underwear and pulled it back.
Fire 2!
Cried Captain Underpants. Zip! Went the cafeteria food right onto the second toilet's mouth. The whole process repeated itself until every last toilet has swallowed at least 2 servings of green shift beef.
We're almost out of ammo!
Captain Underpants shouted. "I don't think I can run anymore," said Harold, huffing and puffing.
Don't worry. Look!
Said George, pointing at the toilets. They had all slowed down and they were beginning to moan and waddle around. Their eyes are crossed and turned into an odd shade of green. "Look out!" cried Harold. "I think they're gonna hurl!" And that's just what they did. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants watched as the toilets unchucked everything they had eaten during the day. The green shift beef, the underwear, even the teachers all came out without a scratch. Then the toilet spun around in small circles and fell to the ground, dead. George checked the teachers.
They're alive!
He said.
Unconscious, but alive!
"Wow," said Harold. "That was easy,"
Too easy.
said George. "What do you mean?" asked Harold. George pulled their comic book out of his backpack and showed it to Harold.
Remember how the Patsy 2000 turned everything on the front cover of our comic book to life?
He asked. "Yeah, so?" said Harold.
Well,
Said George as he pointed to the Turbo Toy 2000 on the front cover of the comic.
we haven't seen him yet!
Chapter 16. The Turbo Toilet 2000. Suddenly, the Turbo Toy 2000 came charging out from the front door of the school with a terrible crash. The earth rumbled beneath his mighty footsteps as nearly a ton of twisted metal and raging porcelain descended upon our heroes.
You three meddling fools may have destroyed my army of talking toilets,
screamed the Turbo Toy 2000.
but you're all out of cafeteria food. How are you gonna stop me?
I'll tell you how!
Captain Underpants said boldly.
With wedgie power!
Wait, Captain Underpants!
Cried George.
You can't find that thing! I'll rip it to pieces!
Boys,
Said Captain Underpants nobly.
I must fight valiantly for truth, justice, and all that is precious to Cottony.
Captain Underpants leads on to the Turbo Toy 2000, and the battle began. I shall hope this doesn't lead to extremely graphic violence, said Harold.
Me too.
Said George. Chapter 17. The Extremely Graphic Violence Chapter, Part 1.
Warning. The following chapter contains intense scenes showing a man in his underwear battling a cat toilet. Please do not try this at home.
Introducing
In the past, literally dozens of epic novels have been written by the change of course of history. Moby Dick, Gone with the Wind, and of course, Captain Underpants and Attack of the Talking Toilets!
The only difference between our novel and those other Brand X novels is that ours is the only one that cares enough to bring you the latest in cheesy animation technology. Wedgie power versus potty power! Oh no! The potty power punch prevails! The carnivorous Camus captures the cat's hand! Chapter 18. Harold and the Purple Ballpoint Pen. Everything seems hopeless. Captain Underpants has slipped and fallen into the mouth of the Turbo Toy 2000, and now the giant toilet is coming after George and Harold. Laughed the powerful porcelain predator.
Once I have eaten you two kids up, I will take over the world!
Not if we have anything to say about it!
Yelled George. George and Harold ran into the school and locked the door behind them. The Turbo Toy 2000 banged against the door with its fist, shouting,
You boys can't hide in there forever!
George and Harold ran into the gym.
I got a plan.
Said George.
I need to invent a character who could defeat a giant robot toilet!
How about a giant robo-urinal? Asked Harold. We can call it the Urinator.
No way!
Said George.
They'll never let us get away with that in a children's book. We're skating on thin nice as it is!
Alright, said Harold. How about a giant plunger robot? He could carry a big plunger and...
That's it!
Cried George. So Harold took out his purple ballpoint pen and began to draw.
Give him laser eyes!
Said George. Alright, said Harold.
And give him turbo-atomic rocket boosters!
Said George. Got it, said Harold.
And make him obey our every command!
Said George. I'm way ahead of you, said Harold. Harold finished with his drawing, and George inspected it carefully.
That just might work!
Said George. Yeah, said Harold. If the Patsy 2000 can hold out. The boys turned and looked at the dented, cracked, and beat up machine laying on its side in the corner. George and Harold pushed the Patsy 2000 upright and dusted it off.
Come on, Patsy, old girl!
Said George.
We really need you now!
Yeah, said Harold. The fate of the entire planet is in our hands! Chapter 19. The Incredible Robo-Plunger. George took Harold's drawing and placed it on the screen of the Patsy 2000 and pressed start. The lights around them dimmed as the rare machine began to shake and smoke. Lightning bolts zapped, thunder clapped, and the whole gymnasium shook with photoatomic whatever energy.
Come on, Patsy!
George shouted over the horrible noise.
You can do it, baby!
Finally, a small ding was heard, and the Patsy 2000 coughed out a huge metallic behemoth. It rose up and stood violently before George and Harold. It was the Incredible Robo-Plunger.
Hooray!
Cried George.
It worked!
Way to go, Patsy! Harold cheered. Now let's go outside and kick some turbo toilet tushy! Chapter 20. The Extremely Graphic Violence Chapter, Part 2.
Notice, the following chapter contains terribly naughty scenes depicting a giant toilet getting its shiny hinny kicked. All toilet violence was carefully monitored by people for the ethical treatment of toilets. No actual toilets were harmed during the making of this chapter.
The incredible ROBO-PLUNGER to the rescue! The incredible ROBO-PLUNGER kicks the TT2000's tushy! The TT2000 takes the plunge! Chapter 21. The Aftermath. The incredible ROBO-PLUNGER has defeated the evil Toy 2000, but George and Harold's problems weren't over yet. They reach into the corrupt mouth of the TT2000 and pull out their principal.
What happened here?
Cried Mr. Krupp.
The school has been destroyed. The teachers are unconscious, and I'm standing here in my underwear.
Uh-oh, whispered Harold. Captain Underpants must have gotten toilet and water over his head. He's turned back into Mr. Krupp. George took Mr. Krupp's clothes and hair out of his backpack and handed them to him.
I'm ruined!
Mr. Krupp whined as he dressed himself.
I'm going to be held responsible for this mess. I'm going to lose my job.
Maybe not.
Said George.
We could fix everything and clean up this whole mess.
Yeah, said Harold. But it'll cost you.
Cost me what?
Asked Mr. Krupp.
Well,
said George.
we'd like you to cancel our detention and our suspension.
And we'd also like to be principals for the day, said Harold.
All right,
said Mr. Krupp.
If you can really fix everything, you've got a deal.
George and Harold turned and spoke to the incredible ROBO-PLUNGER.
Alright, robot guy,
said George.
make yourself useful and pick up all this mess.
Yeah, and fix up the school too, said Harold. Use your laser eyes to repair the broken windows and stuff.
And when you're done,
said George.
take all the evidence and fly up to Uranus.
And don't come back, said Harold. Chapter 22. To make a long story short, the robot obeyed. Chapter 23. After the Aftermath. The incredible ROBO-PLUNGER soared off into space just as the teachers began to regain consciousness. I just had the strangest dream, said Miss Ribble. It was all about these evil toys who want to take over the world. We had the same dream too, said the other teachers.
Well,
said Mr. Krupp.
things turned out all right after all.
Not quite.
Said George.
It's payback time.
Chapter 24. Principles for the day. Or the Invention, Convention, Detention, Suspension, Prevention.
Attention, students!
Said George over the intercom the following day.
This is Principal George. You are all excused from classes today. There will be no homework or tests, and everyone gets an A+ for the day.
That's it, said Principal Harold. Also, we're hosting an all-day recess outside, complete with free pizza, french fries, cotton candy, and a live DJ. Now go outside and play. Principal George and Principal Harold strolled out the playground and beyond their glorious domain. George got a slice of pepperoni pizza, while Harold made himself a banana split in the all-you-can-eat ice cream sundae bar.
It's good to be the principal,
said George. Yep, said Harold. I wish we could be principals every day! Later, George and Harold paid a visit to the unfortunate folks who were spending a day writing sentences in the detention room. All the teachers were there, along with Mr. Krupp and Melvin Sneevely. Mr. Krupp looked out the window at the all-day recess celebration going on outside.
How are you boys going to pay for all that ice cream pizza?
He asked. Oh, we sell some stuff, said Harold.
What did you sell?
Asked Principal Krupp.
Your antique walnut desk and whoever chair,
said George.
and all the furniture in the teacher's lounge.
What?
Screamed Mr. Krupp. I think we better leave now, said Harold. George and Harold left the detention room in a hurry. Miss Anthro snapped her fingers at them. Come back here right now, she yelled.
Oh,
said George.
Miss Anthrop's just snap her fingers.
Within seconds, Mr. Krupp dashed out from the detention room and ran down the hallway towards his office. He had a goofy, heroic, all too familiar looking smile on his face. Oh no! Cried Harold.
Here we go again!
Said George.
Tra-la-la!
Chaos, the mass confusion. PMP is attack, total chaos, the mass confusion. Rocks will hit the top, PMP is attack, total PMP is attack. So think what I said, and either bring something. Don't sleep on the heat. You see something like blunder. It don't take time for me to blow your mind. It take a second to reckon because you're dumb and blonde. So just rounds. But you an MC climbing of the circus. Your D&B is a town. Total chaos. Don't ask confusion. Rhymes so hypnotizing, known to cause an illusion. Like a magician. He draws a rabbit out of a hat, son. I'm drawing more like a 44 Mac. MC3 stop and listen and try to imagine. It's traveling the speed of light, but everything's motion is frightening. Plus the thought you alone, you now enter dimension. Call the Twilight Zone. You're terrified. Plus you can't bear thought. You and I one-on-one. In the land of the lost, you start to shift. Then you scream, my friend, you wake up monthly. Because you're dreaming again. But next time I'm on the scene, do not try to distance. Keep your mouth so sock it up. Because I'm tricked to business. Because you might get shot. 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 Because you might get shot.
You are listening to the sounds of Curtis Mantronic.
Tra-la-la.